You clicked because you're standing in that pro shop staring at a wall of wedges that cost $180 each, wondering if the shiny one actually does anything, the cheap one doesn't. I'm going to save you a small fortune. Here's the truth. I proved to myself on a launch monitor last spring. 5 wedges that almost nobody buys, wedges hiding in the bargain bin and the used rack, spun the ball harder and stopped it faster than the premium models sitting 3 feet away for 4 times the price. I tested them myself, back to back, same ball, same swing, no brand paying me a dime to say it. And there's one $40 wedge that outspun a $160 tour model by over 400 revolutions per minute on a half wedge shot. I'll give you the exact numbers before this is over. The best part is this works whether you're buying new or you already own a wedge you love, because most of what quietly kills your spin has nothing to do with the name stamped on the back. Let me take you back to the round that started all of this for me. It was a Tuesday Muni course, 72 degrees, and I had just spent $170 on a brand new tour wedge because the guy behind the counter told me it would zip back like the pros. I got to a par 5, laid up perfect 60 yards to a back pin. I hit what I thought was a beautiful shot, and I watched that ball land, take one hop, and roll 30 feet past the hole into the back bunker. That night I couldn't sleep, so I did something most people never bother to do. I dug my 15-year-old wedge out of the garage, the one I'd retired, and I took both of them to a place with a launch monitor, and I hit 50 shots with each one. What I found made me angry, and it's going to make you angry too. But by the end, you're going to know exactly what to buy, exactly what to skip, and exactly how to make the wedge already in your bag spin like it did the day you bought it. Let's start with the wedge that opened my eyes first. Everyone ignores the Wilson Harmonized wedge. It sits there in the discount section for about $40, sometimes less. Golfers walk right past it because it doesn't have a tour player's name on it and it doesn't come in 7 grinds with fancy marketing. It looks plain. That's exactly why it's a gold mine. Here's what I measured. On a full pitching distance shot with a fresh harmonized 56 degree, I was getting spin numbers in the 7,000 to 7,500 revolutions per minute range with a soft urethane ball. My premium $170 wedge, same ball, same day, same swing, gave me right around 7,700. That's a difference of maybe 2 to 3%. 2 to 3% for $130 less. Now, let me tell you why that even makes sense. Because when I first saw it, I didn't believe it either. Spin on a wedge shot comes from 3 things: the friction between the face and the ball, the sharpness and volume of the grooves, and the ball itself. The clubhead material matters far less than the industry wants you to think. A cast wedge and a forged wedge with the same grooves and the same loft will produce spin numbers so close together that no human being could tell the difference on the course. Forged feels a little softer at impact. That's a feel thing, not a performance thing. You are paying a premium for a sensation, not for a result. The Harmonized has a decent groove and a face that grabs the ball. On a fresh one, it does the job. And here's the part the counter guy will never tell you. When those grooves wear out in a couple of seasons, you throw a $40 wedge away and buy another one. When your $180 wedge wears out, you cry, and you keep using it because you can't stomach replacing it. So the cheap wedge isn't just cheaper, it's smarter, because a wedge is a wearing part, like a tire, and you should never pay tire money like it's an engine. But here's what got me curious. If the cheap wedge spins almost the same as the expensive one, then why did my old garage wedge, the 15-year-old one, absolutely embarrass both of them on the short shots? That answer is where this gets really interesting. Let me tell you about the wedges nobody wants to touch. The pre-2010 wedges. In 2010, the governing bodies changed the rules on grooves. Before that year, wedges were allowed to have what they called square or U-shaped grooves with more volume and sharper edges. Those grooves grabbed the ball and generated enormous spin, especially out of the rough. After the rule change, manufacturers had to cut the groove volume down and round off the edges. The new grooves are legal and they're fine, but on a measurable basis, they spin less, particularly from anything but a perfect lie. My 15-year-old garage wedge had the old grooves. On a half wedge shot from light rough, 30 yards out, That old wedge produced spin numbers noticeably higher than either new wedge. We're talking several hundred revolutions per minute more, enough that the ball checked up and sat while the new wedges released and rolled out. I stood there on that launch monitor watching a 15-year-old club beat a club I'd bought that month. Now, I have to be straight with you because I promised you honesty and no marketing. If you play in tournaments with a handicap that gets posted, those old grooves are not conforming, and you shouldn't use them in competition. But if you're like most of the golfers I know, you play with your buddies, you play for fun, you play to enjoy your Saturday, nobody is checking your groove volume on the ninth hole. You can find these pre-2010 wedges on the used rack and online for $20 to $40 because everyone assumes newer is better. It isn't. Not for spin. It's the single most overlooked bargain in golf. And this is where I started to get suspicious about the whole business. Because if a decade-old wedge and a $40 wedge both perform like this, then somebody has been selling us a story. Somebody figured out that we'll pay almost anything for the club we use closest to the hole, the club tied to our ego and our short game pride. And they priced it accordingly, not based on what it costs to make, but based on how badly we want to believe. A wedge head costs a manufacturer very little to produce. The steel, the casting, the grinding. You're not paying for the metal. You're paying for the tour player's signature and the 4-color ad in the magazine. But hold on, because the next wedge on my list flips everything you think you know about who should even be playing a bladed wedge. Here's a question I want you to sit with. Why do we hand beginners and seniors the hardest wedge in the bag to hit and call it tradition? A tour wedge is a thin blade with a sharp leading edge and very little forgiveness. In the hands of a tour pro who strikes it perfectly every time, it's a scalpel. In the hands of a 68-year-old weekend player with a slightly steeper angle of attack and a little less speed, that sharp leading edge digs into the turf, the club stops, and the ball goes nowhere. We've all done it. The dreaded chunk, or we compensate, pull up, and blade it over the green. The wedge almost nobody talks about for this is the cavity back wedge. The Cleveland CBX line is the one I tested most, but there are others. It has a wider sole, more bounce, and forgiveness built into the head like a game improvement iron. And here's the number that matters. On mishits, the ones off the toe and low on the face, the cavity back held its distance within a few yards of a pure strike, while the blade wedge lost 8 to 12 yards on the same miss. Think about what that means on the course. You're chipping to a tight pin. With the blade, a slightly thin strike sends the ball racing across the green. With the cavity back, that same slightly thin strike still comes out soft and lands near the hole. That's not a small thing. That's the difference between a tap-in par and a nervous double bogey. These wedges get ignored because they don't look like what the pros play. There's an ego wall in golf, and standing on the wrong side of it cost amateur strokes every single round. I finally got over it. My scorecard thanked me. You can find last year's model of a cavity back wedge for $60 to $80, sometimes less on the used market, and for the average player, it will save more strokes than any $180 blade ever will. Therefore, the real question isn't which wedge the pros use, it's which wedge fits the way you actually swing. And that leads straight into the most misunderstood spec in the entire wedge world. Let me tell you about bounce, because it's the number that's costing you the most, and almost nobody in the shop explains it right. Bounce is the angle between the leading edge of the wedge and the lowest point of the sole. High bounce means the sole hits the turf first and the club glides. Low bounce means the leading edge digs. That's it. It's a simple idea with enormous consequences. Here's the trap. For years, the cool low bounce tour wedges got all the attention. 8 degrees of bounce, 6 degrees, tight little grinds. And amateurs bought them because their favorite player did. But a low bounce wedge in the hands of a player who takes a normal divot or plays off softer turf is a chunk waiting to happen. I tested a 56 degree with 8 degrees of bounce against a 56 with 14 degrees of bounce. Same brand, same everything else. Off a tight, firm lie, the low bounce was fine. But the moment I put it in slightly soft turf or a fluffy lie, the high bounce wedge cleaned up. My strike consistency measured by how tight my carry distance is grouped, tightened up dramatically with the higher bounce. Instead of shots scattering across a 15-yard range, they clustered inside about 6 yards. For the senior player especially, this is gold. As we get older, our angle of attack tends to get a touch steeper and our strikes a touch less centered. Higher bounce forgives all of that. It bails you out of the fat shot. It lets the club skid instead of dig. And here's the money angle. The high bounce wedges are often the ones sitting unsold on the rack, discounted, because the marketing pushed everyone toward the low bounce tour grind. So the spec that actually helps most amateurs is the exact spec that goes on sale. You can walk in and buy the club that fits you best for less than the club that fits you worst, simply because the crowd was told to want the wrong one. That sentence right there is the whole racket in golf, and it isn't just wedges. It's drivers sold on a distance number that never existed, shafts labeled for a swing speed you don't have, iron sets priced like jewelry, balls chosen by the sleeve on sale instead of by compression. Everything I just walked you through with bounce and grooves, I've done the same digging across the rest of the bag, and it wouldn't fit in a video like this one. So I wrote it down. 3 books I researched and wrote myself, over 360 pages, teaching you the 3 numbers every fitter checks and no salesperson volunteers, how to test what you already own on a weekend and pull back 20 to 40 yards for free, and how to match flex, weight, and loft to your real swing speed so you walk out of any fitting bay unsold. Same approach you're watching now, just deeper and with the measurements laid out. If that's you, scan the QR code right there on your screen, link in the description, pinned comment, and the books are yours. Now, back to the bag, because there's a piece of this I know some of you are waiting for. I want you to remember that, because it's the whole game in one sentence. The crowd was told to want the wrong one. Now, I know exactly what some of you are thinking right now. You're thinking, that's fine for the guy buying new wedges, but I already have my wedges. I like them. I'm not spending another $1. Good. Stay right here, because this next part is the most important thing I'm going to tell you. And it doesn't cost you anything. The wedge you already own is probably not underperforming because of its design. It's underperforming because its grooves are packed with dirt and worn smooth, and because you're playing the wrong ball with it. Fix those 2 things and you can recover most of the spin you think you lost. Let's start with the grooves, because this shocked me when I measured it. I took a wedge that felt dead, a wedge I was ready to replace. The grooves were caked with dried grass and dirt from months of play, the kind of buildup you don't even notice because it happens slowly. I hit 5 shots and logged the spin. Then I took a groove cleaning tool, a cheap little sharpener you can buy for about $10, and I actually cleaned and lightly resharpened those grooves. Wire brush first, then the tool, carefully following the existing grooves. Then I hit 5 more shots. The spin came back up by several hundred revolutions per minute. On a half-wedge shot, the difference between a ball that released 8 feet past the hole and a ball that checked and sat within a couple of feet. Same club, same swing, same day. The only thing that changed was clean, crisp grooves. Most golfers never clean their grooves properly. They wipe the face with a towel and think that's enough. It isn't. Dried mud in the bottom of a groove is filling in the exact channel that's supposed to grab the ball and create backspin. A wet towel does nothing to that. You need a groove tool or a stiff brush, and you need to do it after every few holes, not once a season. Here's your no-cost this weekend fix. Before your next round, take a tee or a groove tool and clean every groove on every wedge until you can see clean metal at the bottom of each line. Then, during the round, clean the face after every single wedge shot. Not wipe, clean into the grooves. You will get spin back you forgot you had, and it costs you nothing but a couple of minutes. Now, the second free fix, and this one is bigger than most people realize. The ball. I've watched golfers spend $180 on a wedge and then play a rock-hard 2-piece distance ball because it was on sale, and then wonder why the ball won't stop on the green. Let me give you the numbers, because they're brutal. I tested the same wedge, same swing, with a firm 2-piece distance ball and then with a soft urethane-covered ball. On a full wedge, the urethane ball spun somewhere between 1,500 and 2,000 revolutions per minute more than the distance ball. 2,000. That's not a small edge. That's the difference between a ball that lands and stops and a ball that lands and keeps running off the back. The cover of the ball is what your grooves grip. A urethane cover is soft, and the grooves bite into it. A hard ionomer cover on a cheap distance ball is slick, and your grooves slide right across it. You can have the best wedge in the world, and if you're playing a rock, you've thrown away every advantage. So here's the thing. If you already own wedges you like, you don't need new ones. You need clean grooves and a softer ball. Do those two things, and I promise you'll feel like you bought new wedges for the price of a sleeve of golf balls in 10 minutes of your time. And this is exactly what the industry hopes you never figure out, because they'd much rather sell you a new wedge than tell you to clean the one you have and switch balls. There's no profit in honesty. But even after all of this, even after cheap wedges and old grooves and bounce and balls, there was still one thing I couldn't explain. And when I finally found the answer, it changed how I set up every wedge in my bag. This is the finale, and it's the one nobody told me for 30 years. Here's what was driving me crazy. Two golfers, same wedge, same loft, same bounce, same ball. One stops it dead, the other watches it roll out every time. Why? I found the answer buried in a launch monitor study on wedge gapping and loft, the kind of testing that gets published and then ignored because it doesn't sell anything. And it comes down to two things. Almost nobody checks the loft gaps between your wedges and whether your wedges have ever been checked for the loft they actually are versus the loft stamped on them. Let me explain the loft gap first, because it's the simplest stroke saver in golf. Most amateurs carry a pitching wedge, then jump straight to a sand wedge, then maybe a lob wedge, but the gaps between those clubs are often huge. A pitching wedge at 44 degrees, then a sand wedge at 56 degrees. That's a 12-degree gap. 12 degrees translates into a distance gap of 30, sometimes 40 yards, which means there's a huge chunk of the scoring zone where you have no club that fits. You're stuck either muscling the sand wedge or decelerating the pitching wedge, and both of those produce the exact mishits that wreck your score. The fix is a gap wedge around 50 or 52 degrees, fill in that hole, and here's the beauty of it. A gap wedge is one of the cheapest, most ignored clubs on the rack because it's not glamorous. Nobody dreams about their gap wedge. But adding one and setting your lofts in even 4-degree steps, something like 46, 50, 54, 58, gives you a real club for every distance inside 100 yards. I did this, and my proximity to the hole from that awkward 80-yard range tightened up more than any single equipment change I've ever made. Now, here's the part that truly stunned me. The loft stamped on your wedge is often not the loft your wedge actually is. Manufacturing tolerances mean a wedge stamped 56 degrees can come off the line anywhere from 54 to 58. I've seen it measured. Two wedges from the same store, same stamp, 2 full degrees apart. That's 10 yards of difference between two clubs that are supposedly identical. So you could buy a match set and have gaps that are completely uneven without ever knowing it. You can get every wedge in your bag checked on a loft and line machine at almost any decent club fitting shop, often for just a few dollars, sometimes free if they're bending it for you. Once you know the true lofts, you can have them bent to sit in perfect even steps. This is the thing tour players obsess over and amateurs never even hear about. It costs almost nothing, and it turns a random collection of wedges into a precise, evenly gapped scoring system. Here's the whole secret in one breath. It was never about buying the most expensive wedge. It was about clean grooves, a soft ball, the right bounce for your swing, and lofts that are actually gapped the way you think they are. Those 4 things, none of which require a premium club, control almost everything that happens when you're inside 100 yards. The industry buried that under a wall of $180 blades with tour signatures because there's no money in telling you the wedge you already own is 90% of the way there. Somebody figured out decades ago that the club closest to the hole is the club closest to your ego, and they priced your pride, not the product. But the testing has always been there for anyone willing to hit 50 balls and read the screen instead of the marketing. So let me put a bow on the numbers I promised you at the start. That $40 Wilson Harmonized wedge that outspun the $160 tour model by over 400 revolutions per minute on a half wedge, that was real, measured, on the same launch monitor, same ball, same afternoon. And the reason wasn't magic. It was a fresh, clean groove on the cheap wedge against a slightly worn, slightly dirty groove on the expensive one. Fresh and cheap beat worn and expensive every single time. The cavity back that lost only a few yards on mishits while the blade dropped 8 to 12, real. The high bounce wedge that tightened my dispersion from 15 yards down to about 6, real. The softball that added up to 2,000 revolutions per minute of spin over the rock, real. The clean grooves that brought a dead wedge back to life for the price of a $10 tool, real. None of it required the wall of premium wedges in the pro shop. All of it required somebody willing to test instead of trust. Here's what I want you to walk away feeling. You just took back the one part of your game the industry counted on you overpaying for, and you did it with knowledge instead of your wallet. That's the whole point. You don't beat this business by spending more. You beat it by knowing more. If you're the kind of golfer who'd rather see the real number than swallow the sales pitch, who'd rather fix the club in your bag than be talked into a new one, then you already think the way this whole channel thinks. So let me ask you something specific, and I actually want your answer. What loft is stamped on your favorite wedge right now, and when's the last time you checked whether it's real? Or better yet, tell me this. Are you still playing a firm distance ball with a good wedge and wondering why nothing stops on the green? Drop it in the comments. Be honest. I read them, and I'll tell you straight what I do. And if you want to stop being the golfer the industry overcharges and start being the one who knows exactly what his gear can and can't do, subscribe and stand with the rest of us who refuse to buy the hype. Next time I'm putting the so-called premium golf balls on the launch monitor against the cheap ones, and there's one 3-piece ball under $25 a dozen that beat a $50 tour ball on spin and carry, and I'm going to show you exactly which one. You won't want to miss that number. Go clean your grooves. Put a softball in play this weekend and watch what happens when the wedge you already own finally does its job. Before you go, one quick thing. This video gave you the overview, but inside the Honest Fairway Club, I walk you through the full launch monitor numbers so you know exactly what to buy. And if you've got a question, you can ask me directly, and a real person answers, not a machine. You won't be doing this alone. Just point your phone's camera at the code on the screen, and you can cancel anytime. Now that you know which wedges are worth grabbing, let me help you avoid the biggest money wasters of all. In this next one, I'll show you the irons to walk right past, and the few truly worth your cash. It's starting now.